Hello and welcome to today's broadcast. Thanks for joining in. I'm thinking of playing a little background music while I go over the topics of today. It's going to be Elon Musk, Kanye West, violations of the Logan Act, Mike Pompeo's abrupt about face with regards to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the enticements for someone like Kanye West to cosplay as a white reactionary. Now, when I say reactionary, I'm talking about people who react to social progress, people who are reflexively contrarian when things change. And look, there's a lot of money in it, but there's also a lot of attention in it and savior posturing. So I can imagine for someone like Kanye West, and similarly for Elon Musk, the enticement to play savior to conservatives who often consist of white reactionary folk who want to say good old days were better, we need cultural and religious and racial homogeneity in order to be strong as a tribe and as a nation. Those are reactionary forces, and they are often marshaled in opposition to pluralist, inclusive democracies. And there are some reasons why that's dangerous. It's dangerous to have too many people line up in opposition to democracy and a pluralist democracy because it's contagious to have a movement that promises to deliver moral clarity, the moral clarity that arises from outlandish denunciations of an enemy, a targeted, designated enemy that's typically a scapegoated minority group that jives well, resonates well with people's preconceptions, i.e., ragging on the Jews when there's a long history of ragging on the Jews. So when Kanye West tweeted over the weekend that he was going to go DEFCON 3 on the Jewish people, and when Tucker Carlson kind of cut mention of all of that from his show in order to uplift Kanye West, or Ye as he is now creatively known, to say, look at this man, he's being suppressed and cancelled and had his rights to free speech violated because of his audacity in going counter to the left and daring to say white lives matter. It is contentious to say white lives matter, not because of the bare bones of the statement. We're not trying to exclude white people from believing that theirs, or my, for that matter, life matter. Did I say that sentence correctly? Not trying to discourage people from believing that their lives matter if they're white. And similarly, the left is not trying to discourage people from believing that their lives matter if they are white. But in context of a social justice movement after George Floyd's open daylight street location murder at the hands of multiple police officers, some of whom were kneeling on his back, one of whom was kneeling on his neck, there was a broad social justice movement to condemn the kind of depraved indifference to Black lives, specifically Black lives. Now, police officers in the United States kill 3 people a day, I believe is the figure. And not all of those people are Black, but 23% of those killed are Black, whereas Black people constitute 13% of the population. So it is disproportionately Black people, and that does arise as a function of depraved indifference to the worth of Black lives, hence a movement that formed, regardless of the propriety or fiscal responsibility of any of the people that headed that movement or made themselves into the ostensible leaders of that movement. It was a movement to assert the worth of Black lives and implicitly raise awareness of the fact that, hi Christopher, raise awareness of the fact that police death statistics indicate the existence of a systemic depraved indifference to the worth of Black lives. I will also argue that violence is at such a level in the United States, that there is such a pronounced indifference to life generally, that is a function of Republican success in delivering outcomes based on a misinterpretation of the Second Amendment that facilitates widespread ownership and possession and use of guns, so that people with problems begin to perceive all of those problems as being solvable by higher levels of gun carrying. So much so that I saw 2 men were charged yesterday after their respective children traveling in their respective cars received gunshot wounds because of a road rage incident that spiraled into an exchange of gunfire. So a 5-year-old girl got a bullet in her leg and a 14-year-old girl got a bullet in her back that punctured her one lung, and her lung collapsed and she was taken to hospital, and both of the men were still yelling at each other and were arrested at the scene. So the misinterpretation of the Second Amendment is to make the argument that saying everybody should have guns as a way to counter the ability of wealthy elites to exert a tyranny over the rest of the United States. That is a mischaracterization of how democracy works in the United States, or indeed anywhere. Voting and a free and full exercise of democratic rights to vote is how you counter the interests of the minority moneyed elite. But the GOP have sought successfully in many cases to muddy that water and muddy those waters and to make people believe that it is through their ownership of their guns, of an increasing collection of guns, that they are in fact exercising their duty as a citizen to be vigilant against the forces of tyranny. You don't counter tyranny at an industrial level, at a state level, by possessing guns in your home, unless there's a specific deterioration in democracy that you're organizing against. You don't preemptively collect guns to protect your democracy whilst ignoring the erosion of voting rights amongst the population. Because a lot of Republican-controlled state legislatures have rolled back access to voting. Just today, the Supreme Court agreed with Republicans in Pennsylvania that they should be precluded from counting votes whereby the voters have forgotten to add a date to the outer envelope. So they've dated the inner envelope, and the outer envelope will have a postage stamp, a postage date on it, but they can't count that vote because the Supreme Court has now ruled in favor of the Pennsylvania Republican argument that, give us any old excuse not to count votes. It is antithetical to the idea that Americans are entitled to vote, that American citizens are entitled to vote. The very circumstances that are protective against an escalation of tyrannical forces. So thanks for listening to me so far. Thank you, Christopher, for saying that that's a great and solid argument. I make it repeatedly, but I find different ways to say so. And today, my conception of a pro-democracy newsletter, or PDN, is where I write up various letters of Dear Pro-Democracy newsletter, letters to the editor that help characterize some of the different dilemmas that people have at state level and the different concerns people sometimes have. Are teachers really indoctrinating my children into communism? No, dear reader, they are not indoctrinating your children into communism. They are being mischaracterized as depraved influences on your children in order to advance a Republican agenda of diverting public taxpayer funds into a school choice system or a school voucher system that allows taxpayer funds to fund segregated schools, private Christian schools that do not have to adhere to Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court judgments from 1952 that stipulate schools must be integrated. So when you hear people say, yeah, I'm just school choice because I believe in parental rights, it's a lie, it's a cover story. People may have honestly bought into it, but the truth underneath that assertion is the truth that Republicans are pushing that to undermine public education in the United States, because it is a force that helps democratize America, that does help people of differing abilities have the opportunity to fulfill their potential, to learn skills that will help them be more than docile bodies in a socially stratified system where you have serfs and billionaires who can purchase as however much political power they want in a system that is essentially a staged, managed democracy. That's the Republican goal, to have undereducated people who are more obedient, who accept that perhaps their attendance rate at school should be a determinant of their future, that if they're sick, if they have a disability, that they deserve to be relegated to the bottom of the pile, because if you're lucky, that means you're inherently more worthy. The Republican Party is essentially a front for billionaires who don't want to acknowledge any element of luck, who don't want to acknowledge that they've been born into or migrated to a country that had a lot of previous investment in infrastructure, because America experienced a peak of investment in infrastructure that outdid much of the rest of the world and helped create a fertile soil for business success. So billionaires want to deny the soil from which they sprung, even if there are elements of their own talent, ingenuity, entrepreneurship as well. They want to deny the multifactorial nature of their success and say, we refuse to contribute to that soil. We refuse to pay taxes, or to be more accurate, they are very willing to donate millions upon millions of dollars to politicians who will advance their cause of giving billionaires a pass that ensures they don't have to pay tax, and that perhaps their businesses receive substantial subsidies from the public, that they receive the soft cushion of socialist expenditure for their business ventures, and everybody else must experience the sharp concrete flaws of vulture capitalism, the hard edges of capitalism, without any cushioning socialist safety nets. Republicans want to roll back Social Security and Medicare. A lot of Republican governors at different state levels have refused to expand Medicaid. And coincidentally, or not coincidentally, many of the states that have adopted severe abortion bans have the worst levels of support for mothers and infants. So you're worse off if you're a woman giving birth in a red state where you're also legally forbidden to end a pregnancy, and a doctor faces jail sentences for helping you. And if you're in Texas, there's potentially a bounty, a $10,000 bounty on your head or on the head of anybody who assists you. And all of that legislation gets to create a gray area, gets to cloud your medical care options if your life is at risk, because doctors no longer have a clear medical rationale to help you. Are you hemorrhaging blood because your fetus is in danger and you're heavily bleeding? Oh, is your life 20% at risk or 50% at risk? How much are you willing to go to jail if you help bring that pregnancy to an end so that the woman or girl does not lose her life from hemorrhaging without treatment? And the most hospitals have been closed down. The most rural hospitals have been closed down. The most rollback of state resources to pregnant women and pregnant girls has occurred in Republican-controlled states, the reddest of states, where Republicans have often so gerrymandered political districts and red conservative media has so dominated the airways that people are at a mercy of a pseudo-populist governing style that hurts people and then fabricates enemies for them to blame. Oh, yes, you're suffering. You don't have the medical care you need. Your daughter died in childbirth. It's God's will, but also migrants are coming to take things from you, and they're stretching the resources too thin. That's why, not because your Republican governor refused federal aid offered to expand Medicaid, to expand the number of people who can legally access the help they need to live. Because causing people pain and creating extra hardship for people helps create levels of fear and anxiety that make it difficult for people to use their brains. It makes it difficult for people to have the leisure time to supplement their school education, to increase their own understanding of how the world works and how they can advance themselves within it. Republicans govern in a sadomasochistic populist style, inflicting pain on people, enjoying the dominance posturing of that ability to be so significant in people's lives, to cause such significant harm. Humans have a craving for significance in some way, and that, I will argue, is why Elon Musk spoke with Vladimir Putin before going onto Twitter and proposing a peace plan that involved allowing Russia to continue to claim Crimea as part of its own territory, that would involve the Russian-captured territories of Luhansk and Donetsk to remain Russian, and for Ukraine to refuse to join NATO and avail itself of the military protections that go along with membership in NATO. That's what Elon Musk was suggesting. Oh, because he loves peace. He said, I'm pro-Ukraine. It's just I'm interested in peace. I never knew that in my life I would get so much exposure to what it's like listening to appeasers say, you should just let your country submit to having your buildings bombed, the women raped by soldiers from the invading army, children assaulted, also children removed from their homes and then forcibly adopted in the nation of the invader, and territories acquired with an occupying army that just takes what they want, and escalates their contempt and disdain for the value of Ukrainian lives and the dignity of Ukrainian men and women and children, and particularly women, because women and girls are often very much the victims of war when dominance posturing involves soldiers illustrating to women how little they mean, how their bodies exist for the gratification of soldiers. It's a way of mentally torturing an occupied nation to strip dignity, autonomy, and to potentially even procreate with the unfortunate women whose bodies you have treated as nothing. Yes. And it also, like reading the accounts of a 52-year-old woman who spoke with a reporter from the Washington Post about her experience being tortured and raped by Russian soldiers. It offered me an opportunity to reflect on the strength of Republican commitment to advocating for abortion bans when they said, of course, you should have abortion bans, and people who oppose abortion bans are just trying to encourage a lack of accountability amongst women. They were talking about women. So abortion bans are a way of forcing women to take responsibility for their actions. Typically, women are not procreating on their own. So those kind of statements that say, yes, abortion bans are important to force women to take responsibility and to be accountable for their decisions, acts as if there's never any element of coercion. I mean, I'm not even talking about rape at this point. I'm just talking about men, you can't make a baby without a man, men who pressure women into sexual activity. So not even rape, but just an element of pressure. And an element of pressure perhaps to not use condoms, or to condoms fail more when during coercive activity of that nature, because friction is more likely to make condom plastics break, unlubricated friction. So if you force a woman to have sex with you, even if you're wearing a condom, the statistical likelihood that the condom will break and that an accidental conception will ensue is higher. So women being accused of being lazy and irresponsible and having the value of their lives diminished as a consequence. And the risks to women written off as inconsequential. Oh, maybe some women will die from an ectopic pregnancy, is relegated to a non-salient point in the context of a greater triumph of banning abortion and forcing women to take ownership of their actions and somehow magically conceiving of a child by themselves. So first of all, abortion bans are successful in pushing forward with a framing that relegates all moral responsibility for procreation to women. The responsibility is entirely on you, and that is reinforced by who is punished. Because there is no Republican law advanced to punish men for conceiving an unwanted child. But if a woman has an unwanted child in her body, a fetus, and wants to stop that process, wants to stop the process of that fetus becoming a child, no. The mental torture is inflicted on women, and their medical care options are compromised, and doctors have to weigh up, what does the lawyers in the hospital say about whether or not I can treat a woman with medical complications arising from pregnancy? Has the woman got an incomplete miscarriage, so the process of miscarrying has started and she's bleeding, but it hasn't completed? Medically, I could just terminate this pregnancy right now and she would not hemorrhage to death. But currently, she's not hemorrhaging to death, she's just hemorrhaging. So I have to let her bleed out a bit longer and gamble with her life until I feel confident that I will not be in any personal legal jeopardy for helping save this woman's life. And that's in states where there is an allowance made for abortion to save a woman's life. It is all analogous to racism. Because if, as I mentioned before, police killings have 23% Black Americans, when the Black population is only 13% of the population. So there's a disproportionate number of Black deaths at the hands of police officers. All the deaths are too high. All of the deaths are a function of over-proliferation of weapons of death, of guns, under-regulation of gun licenses, under-regulation of buying and selling guns and acquiring guns. Police are more in fear of their lives each day because when gun ownership levels are higher, levels of gun theft are higher, which enables more criminals to get guns, which encourages police officers to be more concerned for their lives and to shoot quickly and to shoot reactively and to escalate situations out of fear for their own lives. Whether or not those fears are also sullied by the presence of racism, which may or may not relate to the fact that training materials in police academies are often very racist, and undue emphasis is placed on using training materials containing Black people so that police officers develop or have their own racism enhanced and they have become more phobic of Black people and more likely to fire without provocation or without due cause. So yes, unreasonable levels of police violence, unreasonable levels of Black deaths at the hands of police officers in the United States, And white indifference to that sounds and comes across as calling Black people somehow deserving of that fate, a depraved indifference to the worth of lives of Black people, of people of color, in a social stratification of worth. And women are currently having or experiencing what it's like to have your life lowered in value by the Supreme Court's decision, and a buck passed to various state legislatures, many of which are controlled by Republicans whose surface agenda is freedom, but whose actual agenda is to advance a framing whereby women maintain all of the culpability and responsibility for procreating. Women can no longer avail themselves of the options to gatekeep their own bodies and to gatekeep the decision whether or not to bring a child into the world. So they can't. Nope. Any other mistakes or accidents that people have, they're at liberty to take action to remedy an error, provided it doesn't involve murder of a sentient human being or theft. But no, when it comes to pregnancy, oops, condom broke, contraception failed, woman, you have to bear the consequences in your body. You're allowed to give up the child for adoption, but you have to undergo the risks, the mortal risks associated with pregnancy. So I don't have a lot of comments at the moment. I'll move on to using the receipts that we have courtesy of the internet, and not just unburdening myself of my own thought process regarding the new door that has opened up for women, including white women, to relate to the emotional hardship of being relegated to second-tier citizen, of knowing that there are people in power who have a depraved indifference as to whether you as a group, members of your group, live or die, and that increased deaths in your demographic are dismissed as being lacking in significance because your demographic has been disdained. And that also takes me to a video I saw today of a Russian commentator who was saying, we made a mistake. We laughed at Ukrainians. We called them slurs. We laughed at them for being stupid and almost Russians, not quite Russians. And we laughed at America. We laughed at the West. We laughed at President Biden and said that he had dementia and Parkinson's, and we laughed. And the West has given substantial weaponry to Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians are defeating us. So the admission wasn't quite as wholehearted as that, but it was a degree of an admission. We were wrong to laugh at Ukraine. We were wrong to laugh at the West. We are the subjects of mockery now for our militaristic failures. And I wanted to share that video to say, look, it is a mistake to feed your ego on spiteful laughter at the expense of others. And it creates a culture that is then open to inhumane treatment of others. So Russians laughing at and despising Ukrainians created an environment whereby too many Russians, supported Vladimir Putin in his moves to acquire Russian land and to take the lives of as many Ukrainian people as was necessary in his campaign of expansionism and imperialist acquisition, to enfold an unwilling country into Russia, a country that valued its own traditions, its own people, the freedom and rights of its own people, and understood that if they submitted to Russia, that more of their children would die, more of their women would be raped and killed, more of their men would be tortured and killed, and their lands would be stolen, their possessions would be stolen, their infrastructure would be destroyed. So back to receipts. Receipts are important. This is Tucker Carlson celebrating Kanye West even after he had an anti-Semitic meltdown on Twitter in which he announced some death threats to Jewish people generally, saying, I'm going to go DEFCON. I mean, the original expression is DEFCON 3, referring to a level of military preparedness. But Kanye West said DEFCON 3, I have hostility and deadly intent towards Jewish people. So here's Tucker Carlson's perpetually confused face. Candace Owen proving as per normal that it is highly lucrative to be wish fulfillment for white people in validating their racial narrative. That, yes, America's not racist, their understanding of history is perfect, and if you want to support America, you have to support American exceptionalism in a way that says there are no imperfections. The status quo is perfect. If anything, it's just the only wrong thing is that we're too racist against white people. And white lives matter, and white people are the truly persecuted. And if you haven't achieved your potential, it's because too many concessions have been made to pander to non-white people and their allies, who we shall, in our racist way, dismiss as woke and weak. And we will instead give all the credibility and all the hero worship to racist, discriminatory people like Tommy Tuberville and Donald Trump, who advance that narrative of white grievance. So that you can vote for Republicans because they pander to your view of the world, if you are still stuck on the idea that the history you learned at school was accurate and the history that your kids are being taught at school is woke and pandering. And it's not that you weren't taught accurately about massacres or what happened on Black Wall Street or what happened in Rosewood. It's your kids who are the ignorant ones, and people in universities who are the ignorant ones, and you yourself are perfect and your country is perfect except for Black people and allies of Black people. And you give a pass, you give an extra special favorable warm welcome to Candace Owens, who tells you that despite all of those beliefs, you are not at all racist, and in fact other people are racist against you. Very lucrative white grievance cosplay for Candace Owens. And let's have a look. Who else have we got? It's now hateful to say white lives matter. It is because that statement in its current historical context is to say that the Black Lives Matter movement is wrong. It's to wind back the raising of awareness about disproportionate levels of murdered Black people at the hands of police officers. It's to wind back the escalating levels of awareness about systematic racism that is not universal. It's possible to avoid, if you're lucky, some of the systematic ways in which poor people, and specifically but not exclusively, poor Black people are disadvantaged. So there's a lot of anti-poor mechanisms that work in American society. Fees for people who have small bank accounts. The fact that it's so much more expensive to rent things and to be able to have the cash to buy them outright. There's just there's multiple baked in ways to exploit poor people, for wealthy people, for wealthy companies to exploit some relatively low-income people. And that process, those mechanisms can continue relatively uninterrogated or unchallenged thanks to high ambient levels of racism. That people can still say, oh, it's not my tribe being affected by these proposals because I choose to believe that it's only Black people that are poor. Not all Black people, but the poor people substantially are comprised of Black people. And to blind yourself to the existence of lots and lots of poor white people in the United States. So lying about the existence of poor white people is a way in which you get broad-scale acceptance of elements of the status quo that are very punitive towards poverty, people who are experiencing poverty. If you just continue, if you're a Republican or a conservative media outlet and you continue to just emphasize, look at poor people invading the country, streaming across Biden's open border. It's not an open border. Big outlandish lies have been a big thing in the Republican Party since Newt Gingrich popularized the idea that going big with your accusations, big outlandish lies, and frequently repeated lies, and lies adopted by a lot of people. So consistency and repetition and outlandishness will get you airtime from a media that's drawn to drama and from a public that's overly susceptible to racist explanations of what's wrong or what needs to be improved in America. They're like, America needs to be improved in terms of keeping out migrants, when in fact migrants are a key element in America's economic functionality. Migrants start businesses at a higher rate than people born in the United States because of the very nature of people with the chutzpah to migrate to a new country, are also people with the chutzpah to start a business. That's just, it's not a guaranteed universal dynamic. It's just a statistical increase in the likelihood of someone having a zest for improving their own life and starting a business and having that energy and momentum, forward momentum, because they've already got the forward momentum of having left their country of origin and left behind social structures and family members in order to capitalize on their commitment to their family's well-being. Amen for migrants, says Christopher. Thank you, Christopher. Oh my goodness, look how long I've just had sodding Kanye up on the screen. All right, why lives matter. Okay. Next. So Tucker stressed that Kanye West is not crazy and did a follow-up segment on Monday that ignored West's weekend anti-Semitic meltdown. All right, this is some news. Let's go to what's happening in Iran, because Iranian protesters are being shot by authorities because they are protesting against the tyrannical nature of their government. And having weapons wouldn't help them, but what they are asking for help is medical advice, because if they go to a hospital, they're getting arrested. So they need YouTube videos on how to treat gunshot wounds and pellet gunshot wounds at home. So doctors, Iranian American doctors, have told CBS News they can't keep up. They're getting SOS messages from people suffering wounds that seem to corroborate reports of excessive and lethal force being used by authorities. Look at, can you see the little dots in, maybe I need to make it bigger. People are having to deal with gunshot wounds in their arms. Oh, look, somebody's got oh my goodness, it's a gunshot hole in this man's glasses. That is going to be awkward and distressing and potentially blind him. Is that 2 gunshot wounds? I think there might be 2 holes because, of course, scattershot pellets are just, wow. So Dr. Kavan Mihadi tries to connect them with trusted doctors on the ground in Iran, but failing that, he attempts to at least guide them through some home remedies. His message for Iranian authorities: at least let the doctors treat them. Don't take the ambulances to detention centers. Also, at least even let them visit the hospital before you take them away to detention centers. And this is a photograph of a woman's back covered in gunshot pellet wounds. It's awful. These x-rays provided to CBS News by healthcare workers in Iran appear to show a protester's head and torso riddled with lead shotgun pellets. And of course, having lead shotgun pellets in your body is going to dramatically reduce your quality of life as well if all the pellets can't be removed, because lead is a neurotoxin. So lead is associated with an increase in developmental delays for children. So if you're a woman who has a high level of lead in your body and you fall pregnant and you have high lead exposure for the gestating infant, then yes, your pregnancy is more likely to have outcomes of developmental delays and behavioral problems in your children and an increased susceptibility to violence. And that's just some of the conclusions associated with removing lead from petrol, which is that there 20 years after you remove lead from petrol in a nation, there follows significant falls in recorded levels of violent crime. Because lead poisoning, or ending sources of lead poisoning 20 years later, when it's more generations are born and grow up, there's far fewer people committing acts of violence because there's fewer people with lead in their system, acting as a neurotoxin that cuts off your educational opportunities, that cuts off your ability to earn a decent living because you have problems associated with systematic lead poisoning. An Iranian nurse and emergency call operator acknowledged to CBS News, "We are required to report all gunshot cases to the police because all of the phone calls are recorded." She said when an ambulance was called to treat a 14-year-old protester who had been shot, the police arrived. They took the boy away with the catheter still in his hand. Her plea, please let injured protesters know they shouldn't call 115, which is Iran's emergency number, and instead go to trusted private clinics if their problem is not severe. Injured Iranian protesters are also appealing to Iranian American doctors for urgent at-home remedies. Dr. Kamiar says he's never seen anything like the scale of injuries and the number of people who were shot, including underage people and girls in Iran. The medical professionals in Iran say they're sharing these accounts with CBS News, despite the dangers to themselves, because they want the world to know what is happening there and they need help. And somebody's included a video of Iranian security forces shooting at people on the street. The regime badly wants people to go back home, and they don't care how many people die, though it angers people more. So the authorities have lost control. They're shooting people. To me, it's important to watch this even as a counter to those who misrepresent the Second Amendment. A tyrannical regime like this is not countered by guns. If those protesters had guns and were exchanging gunfire with the authorities, it just leads to gunfire battles on the streets and more dead civilians. What these people are doing is seeking to overturn a tyrannical regime. The only way that has ever had efficacy on a mass scale, which is large peaceful protests. Peaceful protest, perhaps counterintuitively to some people, has been the only way of toppling tyrannical regimes before. Actually, no, I say that because based on research I've read, but at the same time, if I think of Hitler, it took state level pushback. It took the combined militaristic forces of the Allies to stop that particular tyrannical regime. But those were armies. Those were not civilians with weapons. German civilians had weapons. It was only the Jews who became the scapegoated minority who lost out on the same citizenship rights that other German demographics had. But a researcher called Erica Chernowith, I remember just reading a bit of the paper that said, in fact, I should be able to find it because I know her name. So we'll keep watching that video while I look. But look at these poor people are still, their spirit of, their thirst for justice is unquenched by the fire. It's awful. All right, let's look. Erica Chernowith and peaceful protest. No democracy movement has ever failed when it was able to mobilize at least 3.5% of the population to protest over a sustained period, according to a study by Erica Chenoweth. At that scale, most soldiers have no desire to suppress protesters. Why? Because the crowd includes their family members, friends, co-workers, and neighbors. With a population of 327 million, the US would need to mobilize about 11.5 million people to assert popular democratic power on the government. Could that happen? So that was published in 2019, but America was able to at least overthrow aspirational fascist government of Donald Trump by a high level of turnout in the 2020 election. So they didn't have to mobilize the population. I'm just changing now to Mike Pompeo, who's made this remark today. He writes, "You know how we can convince Vladimir Putin to withdraw from Ukraine? Give the Ukrainians the weapons they need to win." Now that's interesting and evidence of a big division in the Republican Party, because a lot of Republicans are campaigning on cutting American aid to Ukraine and letting Vladimir Putin do whatever he likes, take over Ukraine, broaden his imperialist ambitions to other countries in Europe, et cetera, and to feel triumphant in his efforts to overthrow Western governments in order to sabotage renewable sources of energy in favor of perpetuating reliance on Russian assets, Russian resources like gas and oil as fuel sources, because that's where Vladimir Putin gets most of his billions from. He gets a substantial cut of the profits from oligarchs in his country who are involved with oil and gas production and the sale of oil and gas. So Vladimir Putin is essentially a big player in the fossil fuel sector, and he has state-level resources which include resources he's been able to develop from diverting taxpayer funds to his own private concerns and his own agenda of overthrowing democracy in the West and installing a puppet candidate like Donald Trump, whose venal self-preservation and self-advancement instincts made him a perfect candidate to flatter and help in the 2016 election and help again in the 2020 election. I know more about what Vladimir Putin did to help Trump in the 2016 election as a consequence of the Mueller report, which highlighted that Manafort gave Republican polling data to a KGB agent, Konstantin Kilimnik, in the Havana bar of Jared Kushner's building on 666 Fifth Avenue. And his deputy, Rick Gates, also printed out documents to give to a Russian KGB agent about key battleground states to help Russians identify where best to use their resources to help get Donald Trump elected, and to then be beholden to the Russian government for its efforts, covert efforts in sabotaging the strength of voter enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton by winding up Bernie Sanders supporters with a big lie narrative of Bernie Sanders had the candidacy stolen from him by Hillary Clinton, and you should punish her by refusing to vote for her in the federal election. Even if you consider yourself to be left-leaning, don't vote for Hillary. She stole from Bernie. You must punish her. So that was a fake stolen election narrative pushed by Vladimir Putin and his KGB minions in 2016. That was detailed by Robert Mueller in that report, which has been neglected and besmirched in the media thanks to the efforts of the then Attorney General William Barr, who lied about the contents of the Mueller report. And the mainstream media hasn't done much to correct its narrative of, whoops, he lied. And we just ran with his fake story. We ran with the fake cover letter that he attached. He preceded the Mueller report with. He said, oh, yep, here's my letter. I've read the Mueller report for sure. It absolutely vindicates Trump. He's innocent. There's clearly no need to investigate him further for obstruction of justice, which is a process crime that involved covering up his other crimes of collusion with Russia. It's an ongoing battle, particularly with culpable media players like Maggie Haberman and Mike Schmidt of the New York Times, who lie about Trump's Russian influences, and they misrepresent what happened and what the Mueller report said and what the bipartisan Senate report said about Russian involvement in the election and the complicity of Trump and the degree to which likely complicity was concealed by the obstruction efforts of Trump and his allies in office. And a lot of the documents that Trump stole from the American government and consequently from the American people once he was kicked out of office likely pertain to that investigation and likely pertain to various proofs of his butt being owned by Putin. What's next? That was Mike Pompeo, who is contrastively saying that Vladimir Putin should withdraw from Ukraine. We can help that happen by giving Ukraine more weapons. And previously he said of Vladimir Putin that he was very shrewd and very capable, and I have enormous respect for him. So that's more reflective of the position taken by a lot of Republicans, that they respect Vladimir Putin as a strongman, and they think Ukraine should just crumble and submit to being pillaged and raped and murdered by invading Russian forces, and that the West should not help its ally. And Ukraine is an ally of the West. Which president was it that won a promise from Ukraine to hand over the stockpile of nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory, in order to just win a promise to be protected? Because that promise has been intermittently upheld. Who made Ukraine promise to hand over stockpiled nuclear weapons? NPR had a story, Why Ukraine Gave Up Its Nuclear Weapons and What That Means in an Invasion by Russia. 3 decades ago, the newly independent country of Ukraine was briefly the third largest nuclear power in the world. Thousands of nuclear arms had been left on Ukrainian soil by Moscow after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. But in the years that followed, Ukraine made the decision to completely denuclearize. In exchange, the US, the UK, and Russia would guarantee Ukraine's security in a 1994 agreement known as the Budapest Memorandum. Okay. 1994 agreement. Who was president in 1994? Was that Bill Clinton? Obviously, Russia has violated that agreement. Elon Musk spoke directly with Putin before tweeting a proposal to end the war in Ukraine that would have seen territory permanently ceded to Russia in what looks like a direct violation of the Logan Act. So the Logan Act was written enacted in 1799 after a chap called George Logan started to negotiate with France in a way that was unauthorized. He wasn't an elected official in 1798. He was negotiating with France, so President John Adams signed the Logan Act into law on January the 30th, 1799, and it was amended in 1994, which changed the penalty for violating the Logan Act from being fined $5,000 to fined under this title. And it's a felony to violate the Logan Act. That would be nice to get Elon Musk for a violation of the law. It's sad that sometimes the law is not prosecuted in order for officials to maintain the appearance of bipartisanship or non-political activity. And it's a shame that Republicans have so been able to avail themselves of the strategy of working the refs. Work the refs, complain very loudly whenever anybody prosecutes you for crimes that you have committed and say, so unfair, so partisan, and then help create a climate of reluctance to prosecute you for crimes that you commit with relative impunity because people are relatively reluctant to investigate and prosecute you because they've been conditioned to anticipate a lot of complaining that American ideals are being compromised and that partisan behavior is ruining the justice system, etc. But if you do the crimes, you should be investigated and you should be prosecuted, even if you are a Republican, and even if there is a highly developed and maintained media bubble that will make an enormous cacophony of complaining noises. Today, I will note, is a major voter registration deadline if you're in Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Ohio, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. So you can go online to weall.vote/register to ensure you are registered to vote. Check that your registration's up to date. Please do that. Democracy is at stake. And you need only look at those videos of what's happening in Iran to see what it's like for the population or how motivated they are to risk their own lives rather than continue to suffer under a theocratic tyranny. And American women are suffering from an undemocratic imposition of tyrannical legislation that has peeled back the rights of women, wound back the rights of women to enact bodily autonomy by availing themselves of a safe medical care to end a pregnancy, whether it be because they're miscarrying and need medical care to end an already failing pregnancy, or if they're in a later stage of pregnancy and they need medical care rather than carry around a corpse of a wanted child in their uterus, or if they have a lot of children and lack the means to financially or emotionally provide for another child, and they want to bring that pregnancy to an end. So if they lack resources, that's typically something that women know early on in their pregnancy, and they are the arbiters of what happens in their body. Or at least they could legally do that when they had the protection of Roe v. Wade. And even then, in many states, Roe v. Wade had been substantially eroded, but now it's completely overturned. And every woman in America is at risk of Republicans gaining a majority in the Senate and in the House, and then having Senator Lindsey Graham's 15-week abortion ban instituted. And then if your 20-week scan shows that your baby has no prognosis of viability outside the womb, you have to keep continuing with that pregnancy against your will. If your health is at risk, you have to keep letting those dice be rolled until any specific hospital's lawyers feel comfortable in pronouncing the risk to your health sufficiently dangerous for you to receive the medical care you need to save your own life. And women who've had a diagnosis of cancer and also been pregnant have had those cancer treatments made unavailable to them because of the legal complexities introduced by Republicans in different states. So imagine that. Your baby's not going to survive if you don't survive, but your health and your life becomes a target of a Republican roll of the dice because the legal status of the fetus has been elevated over the value of your own life. Their savior posturing has been pandered to in a way that puts your health and life at risk. So that's all from me for today. Thank you so much for listening. To those who stayed with me or to those who joined partway through, and to any replay viewers as well, thank you so much. Let me just make the screen bigger for a second so I can show this this item, which is a Mobilize site. Get out the vote opportunities at mobilize.us. Volunteer opportunities, events, and petitions near you. So you could check out that website, but also this writer called Stephen Beschloss says he's worried that too many people fail to grasp how profound would be the loss of our democracy. Every effort to secure rights and improve life for the large majority of Americans depends on it. This is the time to remind everyone who might not grasp what's at stake, what is at stake, and why they must vote. So that's my concluding message for the day. Oh, one final point, that Governor Abbott's on the local news backpedaling on abortion and women's rights, which means he saw the polls, but that Texas abortion ban's still in place. So he's only going to be paying lip service to try and reassure whatever margin of Republican women are feeling a little bit jittery about their commitment to going into the polls and voting for an extension and a perpetuation of those legal complications to women's healthcare, those legal impositions that consign rape victims to carrying their rapist child against their will. I mean, if they want to carry their rapist child and say, I have the capacity to love this child regardless of its origins, or I believe I have the capacity to love this child and to raise this child regardless of the circumstances of its conception, regardless of my lack of a relationship with its rapist father, then that's a woman's personal decision. But to say 10-year-old, 15-year-old, 18-year-old, a woman of any age does not have the right to reject continuing with a pregnancy that had its initiation in violent, coercive, manipulative circumstances. It's not okay, and it's all of our hope that enough women perceive the urgency of the moment and the necessity of stepping up to save democracy in its hour of peril. It's hour of absolute peril because Donald Trump is not an isolated agent. He has emboldened a multiplicity of Republican officials and Republican candidates to say, yes, they will either win an election or they will overturn the results of their opponent's electoral success. They will do their utmost to say, I don't accept the outcome, and in fact, we're going to find a way around it where we're going to sabotage the certification of any Democratic victory in this election, in these midterms. And the Supreme Court is soon to hear the Moore versus Harper case, which would allow an independent state legislature theory of the law gain dominance, which would allow state legislatures to override even their own Supreme Courts, state Supreme Courts. So if they say, we don't like the outcome of the election, we think Donald Trump won based on our gut feeling, and their state Supreme Court says, well, no, you don't have any evidence that there was any theft, that there was any tampering, that there was any manipulation of ballots. There's evidence it was a straightforward election and the will of the people has been expressed at a collective level. The independent state legislature theory, if codified into law by the Supreme Court, by all the 6 conservatives on the Supreme Court, then they can say, no. So please vote. Please check your registration online. Please encourage others to do so. Please make a plan to help take others to the vote. Please help. It's 4 weeks till the election, till the midterm elections. So consequential. Please get involved with get out the vote efforts. Thank you so much. Bless you. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Roman 14. Take care, everybody, and talk again soon. All the best. And I've been practicing a song. What do people think is the best time to sing? At the end of a broadcast? I don't want to drive people away at the beginning of a broadcast by making them think it's just going to be me singing, because it's not. This is primarily political analysis and an engagement with current political events. But when is a good time to sing? Intermission. I was practicing a song. And the more I practice singing, the more I also think I like changing some lyrics. Randy Rainbow does that really well. He's got good video editing skills, but I'm not Randy Rainbow. I have my own perspective. And although I lack editing skills, I'm also interested in singing. So Christopher says, you choose, I'll be there. I know you will. You're so encouraging. I really appreciate it. I'll work on it. All right, chaps and ladies, gentlemen, thank you. Have a good day. Take care. All the best. Talk soon.